Wisdom is God's bride, not Jesus's bride. If the bride of Christ can be one thing, why wouldn't it be a physical, literal person? Wisdom isn't considered as God's daughter, or Jesus's wife, she is God's counterpart. She is God's wife. When the Bible mentions wisdom, it speaks of how she rejoiced as God created this entire universe. Her energy is displayed as a wife. She praised her husband for the good works he did daily as his light created endless possibilities. She gave him inspiration, she inspired him to create more. But wisdom was around before anything was created. She is his spirit. His own light revealed her to himself. I'm starting to look at God completely differently. Before God created this universe, he was a young, vibrant, single light source. Back then he was all alone, in silence and thought. Nothing had yet came into existence until he came in contact with wisdom. I rarely talk about this, but I believe I have to now. Wisdom is God's spirit, the feminine aspect of God himself. Think about it like this. God being the young God of light that he was at the beginning of the universe. He resided in complete silence. He had no one to talk to, he had no one to confine in. He was all by himself. He decided he needed some kind of company. He used his own light to reveal his spirit, he then realized he wasn't alone after all. His spirit was feminine. He shined a light on that feminine aspect of himself until it actually became a thing, something he can feel. A living energy. Once he perfected that energy by finding balance in it. Not suppressing it. Once he did, that particular energy called wisdom also found balance in God, the masculine aspect of herself who shined a light on her. Let me say this, please don't make the mistake of classifying wisdom as God. Wisdom isn't God, wisdom isn't a God. She's a spirit, she's God's spirit. She's a part of him, he revealed her through himself. As God created things she kept him company. They probably talked about everything. I'm sure he needed that. God needed someone, his masculine energy needed something, he needed wisdom. He needed a soft, gentle, loving, feminine spirit to balance his masculine energy. Have you ever heard someone say things about women being with men before they became famous, or before they became rich? Wisdom was there, she was with God before everything came into existence. Before the money, fame, planets, and galaxies. Wisdom was around before Jesus was created. She was and is God's partner on every aspect, on every level. Their love is beyond our human comprehension. Their love has been around before time came into existence. Their love resides outside of time. Wisdom is so important to understanding God. When people say things like wisdom is in everything, I don't think they truly understand what that really means. Her spirit is in everything because she was there when God created it. She rejoiced in everything, the good and bad. God needed that. Therefore, being thankful for wisdom's company, and after enjoying the energy wisdom produced, he showed gratitude by making sure all his creations had her spirit. All of God's creations has the spirit of wisdom. That beautiful feminine energy that kept God company while he thought and created this entire universe. She resides in everything. Her rejoicing inspired him to create limitless things. God was alone, he probably didn't have the inspiration to do anything. When God was alone he rested in silence, then wisdom came along and because of her feminine, loving, thoughtful energy everything came into existence. God created it, she inspired it. God probably created many things just to impress her. God might have created things just to hear her rejoice and see the happiness she had for everything he's done. She brought him so much happiness. If you read the Gnostic story, you would understand how this world came into existence. God was the creator of the universe, wisdom was the rejoicer. But one day wisdom decided to create something on her own. Without the help of God, her husband. Wisdom literally tried to make a world, without her counterpart. When wisdom realized, she created something imperfect, because she needed her husband to perfect it. She hid it, she hid this world, she hid her imperfect creation from her husband. That's why wisdom removes the veil of ignorance. She created the veil, she will remove it herself. She created a veil to keep God from seeing her mistake, and to keep her mistake from seeing her. She had to learn who she was also, she had to learn she was God's wife. That's why this all happened, because she didn't know who she was the one who inspired him to create, she didn't know the role she played in God's life as his wife. She made a mistake, but God had a solution to their problems. Jesus was created because of her imperfections. He was the solution to their problems and the answer to our prayers. Jesus is God and wisdom's son. Their perfect creation. God had to show wisdom what she could actually create, with the help of her husband. Jesus was God's way of showing her when they create something together, it would be a perfected flesh and spirit. He had to show her she's capable of producing a child the right way, to show her who she was to him. His wife, and the mother of his creations. Wisdom is redeeming herself, it's wisdom's redemption, as well as Eve, and the bride. She's redeeming herself from her mistake. Correcting her mistake would require the Bible to be revisited, revised, and restored. If you take a look at the Bible today, she's already started to correct her mistakes. Take a second look, because she is making all things new. What you thought you knew has changed. The God of Moses has evolved, he now has a wife. Yes, she messed up, and hid her mistake from her husband. He didn't divorce her, he wanted her to know her place, by his side. He's allowing his wife to redeem herself and all things of feminine nature and essence. God having a wife, and Jesus having a wife would mean there will be marriage in heaven. I don't think God is going to do away with evolution. He's not destroying our flesh or this planet, he's only perfecting it and making them both better. Our flesh ages on earth, but in heaven God perfects age and time. He doesn't destroy age and time, he perfects it so people won't grow old and won't die young. Heaven is all about unity and perfection. Everything in heaven is unified and perfected through Jesus, God, his wife, and daughter. This isn't an ordinary marriage. This marriage is also a perfection of our flesh and spirit. Jesus and his bride marrying each other unifies everything on every level of life itself. This marriage perfects the human soul. It perfects it through the love of a man and a woman, it perfects love on every aspect because it would mean Jesus' wife becomes God's daughter through marriage. God's wife will be highlighted also. When Jesus marries his bride, it unifies God and his wife, the perfected feminine and the masculine spirit. The bride is her daughter, who becomes his daughter through marriage of his son. It's the perfect balance of masculine and feminine. A mother/daughter and a father/son. The most amazing part of all this, while this marriage takes place, a city will be unified with its people. The marriage of Jesus and his wife unifies heaven on earth. Because of this marriage, because of this unified event, heaven will present itself on earth. Once the vows have been taken, and it is declared Jesus and his bride are officially married. The bride, and the Spirit, God's wife, wisdom will say come. Some will already be there waiting on the bride and groom and first family, because they've learned this truth, the gates will be opened and it will welcome everyone who comes and wishes to live a life prepared by God. Many others will barely make it, that is truly the real meaning of the barely harvest. I will make a video on that soon. The barely harvest are the people who barely make it to the city. Literally by the grace of God they were able to come and dwell somewhere close enough to be considered a part of the city. Others won't know until it's too late. There will be a wedding, not everyone will be invited. Only those who believe there will actually be a wedding will be there, happy and rejoicing, because they made it. Those people who love God, His wife, and His son and His son's soon-to-be wife. You won't be welcomed if you have any ill feelings, you won't get an invitation. You have to be invited. Lucky are those who are invited and able to be present to witness the marriage of the Lamb. Those people won't return to earth. They won't have to return after the wedding. Why would they? The barley harvest won't make it to the wedding either. It's okay, because they will have the option to attend the wedding reception. The parable of the 10 virgins is about the barley harvest. That parable is explaining how you won't be able to go back and prepare, you have to be ready at that moment, because once the wedding begins, why would they pause it to welcome in any late bloomers? The parable of the virgins is God's way of saying, I'm not stopping this wedding to let anyone in who barely made it. Their lights were dim because they barely had any oil. Why would God stop the wedding of this only son to allow late people who wasn't ready to come when the time came? That's what that verse means. The city will be a place prepared for people who believe it actually exists. You won't be welcome to the city if you believe the actual city is a bride, or the church. You won't be welcomed to any of these events. Not because of your disobedience. You won't be welcomed because of your ignorance. People who think the bride is the church won't be welcomed to the wedding. People who don't believe the wedding feast is simply a reception following the wedding won't be allowed to eat and dance, because their ignorance won't allow them to assume it's a literal bride, and an actual wedding, followed by a wedding reception. Not believing it denies you the chance of ever experiencing it. People who believe the city is the bride won't experience that city. Because their ignorance led them to believe the city was the bride, and the bride is a city. You by your own doing will remove yourself from the experience. The barley harvest are people who literally at the last minute decided to believe. That half belief, and not being sure what God wants, will have you barely making it to participate in any of these events. There may be 2 groups of barley harvest people. The actual wedding will not consist of any people who barely make the event, as I mentioned earlier. So the other 2 barley harvest will consist of people barely making it to the city and the people barely making it to the reception. You won't be able to barely make the wedding. That's what Matthew 25 was all about, people who barely make the wedding, and the people at the last minute, who try to become aware enough to experience the event. They will barely make it, but the wedding event isn't welcoming people who barely believe there will be an actual wedding. If you are unsure that there actually could be a wedding, you won't be there. The bride does the inviting. If you don't believe she's real, you shouldn't expect to invite. If you don't believe there will be a wedding, don't expect to experience any wedding events. If you miss the wedding, you could still make the reception. If you miss the reception, you can aim for the city. God will exist in all these places. Aim for them. You will literally have 3 chances, at least choose one.